that website on a daily basis. Now, as I said at my press conference there, my end of year press conference, the traffic department of the Guyana Police Force, some at GRA, some at the Stellings, and so forth, where people try to pass other people with a truck to get on the boat and things like that, and they pay money. As soon as we get that information is taken down and sent directly to the agency concerned with the printout. It is sent to the head of that agency or that department for them to deal with it. Now, we don't necessarily follow up because we're not there to police them. We don't necessarily follow up to them to ask them, well, have you followed up? Have you taken action on this? What action you've taken? And that kind of stuff, because that's not our role as a Ministry of Affairs. At least what we have done is to facilitate them with information from the public on our website that they can go to too, because it's free and it's open. But as a courtesy, because some people might be very busy and they might not have assigned anyone particularly to follow that I Pay the Bribe website. So we considered our responsibility to pull down that information, send it to them, and ask them to deal with it.
And the ministry overlooks some of the departments listed on that website that people...
Well, in cases where the allegation is relevant to one of the departments that falls under the ministry, of course, you know, these are, people hear me speak, the commissioner and others would hear me speak when I refer to these things with respect to the police, and other officers are there, you know, and I would expect that they would take note of what the minister have said and acted on it.
So if you don't follow up the notices that are sent, how are you able to gauge the effectiveness of the website?
Well,
or have you gauged the effectiveness of the website?
The effectiveness, as so far as we're concerned, is rather limited, in the sense that it takes the information, or people post the information, and we then send the information onwards. It is left now to that government agency and department to act on what we have sent them, or to investigate what we have sent them, or to deal with it as they deem fit. That is insofar as the efficiency of the website is concerned. And I repeat, our role is not to play the oversight role in relation to corruption and the I Pay the Bribe postings on other government agency departments. That's not, we've not been given that responsibility at all. But when it comes to agencies or departments under us, well, that's a different matter.
Are you able to say if the information that has been sent out is actually been effective in that the amount of bribes that have been taking place is being reduced? Has anybody been charged? Are there any disciplinary measures?
I know that in the case of the police, right, those things that are sent to the commissioner, I know that he takes action on them. He writes to me, he tells me how many of them, just like in the electronic crime reporting system that we've put in place. We get a lot of that too. A lot of people send things to us, and I've noticed they've stepped up the ads on the television, the electronic crime reporting issues. And so I know as far as the police is concerned, they will investigate those matters that are relevant to them, and based on our requests, you know, for returns on what have come out of these investigations, they will let us know.
Has the Commission indicated whether or not there's been a reduction in the...
No. I'm not so sure whether
all right, let's move on.
he should do that, or whether, you know, anybody could go on the website and do it, because it's all there. So you could do the comparative analysis, you know, to determine whether there's a reduction in one section or reduction in another section. It's all open, the information is all there.
Okay, sure. Abina.
Mr. Romani, you said in your opening statement that the lies and false hope that AFC spread in June 2011 election has caused the support for the upcoming election to dwindle. Were you able to track also how supporters felt about promises that President Ramaphosa made in the 2011 election campaign that he wasn't able to fulfill, like offering a local government election, etc.?
Well, you know, the local government election has been bandied about as has been discussed thoroughly. You know, so much so that even the international community with the local representatives have taken, you know, sides on the issue. So if you are to focus only on the local government issue as a promise that was made by the People Progressive Party in its manifesto, I think that issue has been fully ventilated. And whether wrongly or rightly, or who is wrong and who is right, the fact of the matter is that we were confronted with a no confidence motion in Parliament. The opposition felt that that was the answer to the non-holding of local government elections. The government or the president decided to take a particular course of action, and we are now at the gates of general and regional elections. So I think that's water under the bridge so far.
Does the supporters see it that way? Does people, the supporters see it that way? As
Which
well?
way?
Those that you went around and visited?
Well, you see, because of the fact that, as I said before, you have the question of local issues being raised. Fixing of cokers, fixing of dams, fixing of bridges, garbage disposal, roads, drainage, and so on. Those are issues that are localized issues. And from time to time, you will have people, you know, talk about changes in the NDCs or the RDCs and so on. And that can't happen unless you have elections. But then when we as politicians explain to the people why we're not having local government elections, what is responsible for the delay, you know, we give them the historical antecedents relevant to the non-holding of local government elections, then they tend to understand. You see, if you explain things to people, people tend to understand. If you don't explain, well then, you know, that's not too good for you as a politician.
Can I go off statement?
No. Dennis wanted to ask something.
Yes, I wanted to know, Mr. Rooney, why does your party want public vetting on GCOM style?
Listen, I think that we are now in a new cultural dispensation. I think this country has evolved tremendously compared to where I knew it was prior to 1992. And I think, generally speaking, people like openness, and the media itself presses for openness. I mean, look at the kind of questions that are asked at press conferences like this. You've been pressing the question about Mr. Lakeradge's removal. You want to know why it was removed, how it was removed, and all these questions. Well, it's the same questions, I suppose, that are relevant in connection with the officials, public officials, or persons who are hired to work with an institution that is so important as GCOM. You know? So I think it resonates with the democratic culture.
But at vetting, what would you like to have?
It resonates with the democratic culture. It resonates with the call for transparency and accountability and these things. I mean, these calls cannot be relevant only to government officials. They have to be relevant all around. Everyone, all and sundry, must be subjected to transparency and accountability.
Yeah, but what the vetting process should include? What should they seek to find out as far as employees of GCOM are concerned?
Basic information, I suppose, about the individual. Basic information.
Example.
Well, I've seen, for example, the GDF did a vetting exercise of persons who applied to join the Guyana Defense Force. That's the kind of vetting we're talking about. The photographs are published, some basic biodata is published about the person, where they worked before, and things like that, so that the public, that's what I mean, public vetting. The public would see the person, and if the person, and if the public, anyone in John Public or Mary Public, is aware of some, you know, cloud, then they should be free to inform GCOM, not the political parties, of course, but they should tell GCOM what they know.
So would you, for instance, be concerned about the political background of prospective or current employees of GCOM?
Well, unless something comes to our attention, like in the case of one of your colleagues in the media sector, who's been hired by GCOM, the public relations officer, unless something like that comes to our attention, which stirs our interest politically. Otherwise to that, no.
Mr. Rohi, a lot of times when we hear the party talk about its outreaches and its bottom house meetings, and so we hear the party talk about the AFC and its support base. And so does the party see the AFC as a bigger threat to its support base than the APNU heading into the 2015 elections?
I don't think so, You know why? Anyone who knows the history of the PPP would recognize that since this party was founded in 1950, it has always had either individuals or persons who would have formed political parties seeking to undermine it politically, destroy it organizationally, and electorally. We've had these fights throughout our entire history. Parties forming, parties disappearing, and they all have one specific interest, which is to see the backs of the PPP out of government, or while in the opposition, to see the PPP totally demoralized, with no sting, and with no capacity to wage a consistent fight and struggle. It has never succeeded. So this question of fear of a political party or fear of elections, and in fact, in going around and talking to our supporters and members of the community and so on, I've never heard anybody say to me at least, or in the reports that come back, them saying that, man, we're afraid if we go to this election, we're going to lose, and maybe we ought to think about it again. What they do, on the other hand, is to say, as I said in the statement, that we must prepare ourselves well for the fight. We must organize, we must mobilize well. We get back the groups and the structures, in full speed.
But do you think when we look at these campaign style in regions 5 and 6, you hear them talk more about Nagamutu and Ramjatan more than you hear them talk about the Granger in those two specific regions? Why is that, if it's not for fear of the AFC with those two leaders chipping away at your support base?
I don't think I've heard something like that.
Well, in your statement, you spoke about the AFC. We've heard members of the PPP constantly talk about the AFC.
No, but that isn't. You see, we have to have reference points, and we have to be able to contextualize whatever we say. We cannot speak in abstraction or isolation from the swirling, so to speak, that is happening in the political maelstrom. Now, obviously, when you look at the votes in 2011, the votes cast, you would obviously see that the AFC got votes in places which traditionally were PPP areas. And we've been hearing that since 2011. Not only people have been talking about it, people have been writing about it. They've even been saying that we might very well end up in a similar situation like we ended up in 2011. All these permutations you're hearing all over the place. So, yes, we have to make references and comparative analysis and things like that. But it doesn't necessarily mean ipso facto that because of inroads made in 2011 that you're afraid, quote unquote, of who did that and whether they could do it again. You have to do your work. You have to do your work. That probably happened because we didn't do things that we were supposed to do. And so we have been correcting all of these things since 2011. We've worked very hard and very painstakingly to correct whatever, for want of a better word, mistakes or deficiencies that appeared that we didn't deal with in those days.
Minister Roy, last week the AFC protested the U.S. Embassy calling for...
The what?
The AFC protested the U.S. Embassy along with some other persons calling for government...
Along with who?
Some other persons, individuals.
Oh.
calling for government ministers' visas to be revoked. Is the party
government.
yeah, government visas to be revoked? Is
Mm.
the party at all bothered by this?
Why should we be bothered about that? Why should we be bothered? I don't see any reason why the PPP should be bothered about that. I haven't seen any, I have heard any of my colleagues run into this PPP office, wringing their hands and saying, you know, why are you afraid? What are we going to do now? I'm panicking and, you know, let's do something about it, lest I lose my visa and so on. Nothing like that has happened. There's total calm.
Final question, because you have another. Quite sure.
Mr. Murray, I'm interested in knowing what has caused the PPP to change its policy on foreign intervention.
On what?
Foreign intervention into Guyana's affairs. Before 1992, you got help from the Carter Center, and you welcomed that help. But now you're saying that you don't want other foreign people meddling in Ghana. So I'm interested in knowing what has changed, what policy has changed, or why the difference between having meddling now and meddling back then?
Well, I don't think that was in 1992 or prior to 1992 that was meddling. If it was meddling, it was justified meddling.
And it's not justified now?
No, because in those days you had an undemocratic regime that held on to political power by rigged elections. Everybody knows that. And therefore, regime change, even though the phrase was not coined in those days, was applicable. And so, having lobbied U.S. congressmen and senators, and having the U.S. Embassy here having been sympathetic, I would assume, to the change, the need for change in the government.
Ms. Roy, you said back then you had undemocratic regimes, but this is the same thing the PPP regime is being accused of now.
What?
Lack of democracy.
Depends on who is being accused, who is accusing us of that. Obviously, obviously, if the opposition is accusing us of that, that is to be expected. You don't expect the opposition to say, oh, you know, we have a wonderful democracy in Guyana. You don't expect the opposition to say, you know, things that are pleasing to the ears of government and the PPP. Opposition would never say that. The opposition is to oppose and depose and expose.
Final question, sorry. But you've never offered this explanation before. You've asserted sovereignty, you've asserted independence, but we've never heard that the context was different.
My friend, we are politicians as well as we political scientists. We are also dialecticians. If you understand the laws of dialectics, what is applicable in one situation is not necessarily applicable in another situation. So, you know, as political scientists, you don't have to always give a stock explanation. Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't help you with that because it would require, you know, a long and lengthy political discourse.
Sir, how do you rationalize the whole concept of meddling or involvement when indeed Guyana is a signatory to a lot of international conventions, and therefore they, like other countries, are also expected to live up to this?
Again, one has to contextualize what you're talking about. If you take the opposition's line, if you're in, psychologically speaking, in sync with the opposition, that having read all of the Kaiser News publishes on a daily basis, all the Starbuck News publishes on a daily basis, all the Demerara Waves and iNews publishes on a daily basis, that this country has sunk to the lowest levels. If you take that line, obviously you would agree that there is indeed cause to meddle, to change. But didn't you see what CARICOM said? Did you see what the CARICOM Council of Ministers said? Why not talk about that? It seems to me that the CARICOM Council of Ministers issued a statement that struck a more balanced, you know, tune, so to speak.
At the behest of the Guyanese government.
My friend, The Caribbean community doesn't operate like that.
So the foreign missions have an opposition line then, since they agree, since
No,
they
no,
are
no.
actually ones who are meddling.
The foreign, that is precisely why we talk it, but that is precisely why we call it meddling. That is precisely why we call it meddling, because when you look at the situation in Guyana today, how old are you, my friend?
Old enough.
I don't know what old enough means.
My age has no relevance. Sir.
It has, because while you may want to acquaint yourself with the history books, you also have to relate to what happened at that time in life's experiences. Without that connection, you will only be theoretically and hypothetically associating yourself with what took place in the past and writing for the sake of writing. One has to have a physical and a spiritual connection with what took place in the past in Guyana, my friend. If you don't, then you could easily lose your way in the debate that is taking place of what is democracy, what is not democracy, whether we had elections that were rigged and whether we didn't have elections that were rigged. Such is the course of history.
Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. You only 15 minutes for me there. With me, as usual, is our General Secretary. He will be reading 2 statements, after which he will be taking questions. Yes?
Thank you very much. The party is encouraged by the show of support it has been receiving from party members, supporters, well-wishers of the wider community during the several party outreaches conducted by the party before the holiday season. The PPP will soon recommence its countrywide outreach program with a series of bottom house meetings, as well as community and walkabout activities planned. Party leaders will fan out the coastal and hinterland regions in the coming weeks. There was overwhelming show of support for the decision taken by the President to prorogue Parliament following the attempt by the AFC-APNU to move a vote of no confidence against the government, and the obvious abuse of the National Assembly by the one-seat majority, combined opposition, to settle personal scores and stymie the developmental trusts of our country. The mood of the people with whom we met was one of optimism, with encouraging signs that the PPPC would win a comfortable majority of the votes whenever elections are held, thereby being in a much better position to continue with its developmental agenda without let or hindrance by the opposition parties. The party is well underway with its preparations for these elections. Already, we have started to mobilize our volunteers and activate our elections machinery. We have never been afraid of elections. Party members and supporters took the opportunity during the community meetings and outreaches to pledge their continuing support to the party and their commitment to work untiringly to realize a complete victory for the party at the polls. Party supporters condemned the role played by the AFC in collaborating with the APNU to destabilize the PPPC administration and their combined efforts to slow down the pace of economic and social progress. The AFC joined with the APNU to shoot down all the major transformative projects, such as the modern airport, the Amaila Hydro project, the specialty hospital, among others, not to mention projects that would have created thousands of jobs for young people due to the much improved education system under the PPPC. Most of the communities visited by the party leaders is of the strong opinion that several erstwhile supporters who voted for the AFC in the last elections regretted their decision, especially in light of the extent to which that party allowed itself to be used and manipulated by the APNU. Further, the AFC led a campaign of lies and false hopes in 2011, misrepresenting the facts and making unrealistic promises to the people. The AFC must be reminded that their cynical approach will not be allowed in 2015. Guyanese will no longer be fooled by unpatriotic, power-crazed politicians. Residents also took the opportunity to raise issues with the party functionaries and express satisfaction with the role played by the party in bringing these to the attention of policymakers and the relevant authorities. The next statement reads as follows. The People's Progressive Party wishes to reiterate that the meeting it held last week, Monday, with Guyana Elections Commission was cordial, and we welcome the commitment by the chairman of the commission in several areas. Today I wish to elucidate on some of the issues with which the PPP was pleased, based on the positive responses from GCOM. These included: 1, folios for polling agents. In the past, folios which included the picture of every voter next to their names were in the possession of the presiding officer only and had to be shared among all the polling agents at the polling station. The PPP's position is that every party polling agent must have their own individual folio. This, GCOM has assured, will be implemented. Presiding officers respecting the rights of polling agents and candidates to the polls. In 2011, there were too many instances where presiding officers did not comply with the instructions and the law in accommodating and facilitating the polling agents and duly appointed candidates to the poll. Such actions took away from the transparent and democratic culture which were painstakingly built by stakeholders, especially by the PPP post-1992. GCOM's chairman on behalf of the Commission has assured the PPP that the manuals of the rights of voters, polling agents, candidates to the poll, and counting agents will be made public through the print and electronic media. These instructions will be reinforced by intense training of Elections Day workers. Voter education program. The PPP team re-emphasized that the voter education program of GCOM must not only educate voters on how to vote, but must also educate the voters on the process and the rights of voters. This in particular was hammered home in light of the fact that many ballots were rejected in 2011 for want of the 6-digit stamp on the ballot paper. GCOM has looked favorably on this request of the PPP. Quick response mechanism. The PPP team also put on the table observations that GCOM on Elections Day needs to have a quick response mechanism to address issues that duly appointed party officials would face on Elections Day. The PPP position is that while we may have all the best practices in place for the elections, if issues that emerge on polling day are not dealt with expeditiously, then there can be shadows cast over the elections. The above are just a few of the issues which the party has tabled and discussed with GCOM. The PPP's engagement with GCOM continues today, the 19th of January, 2015. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There you had the two statements.
Machinery. There have been calls from the APNU for the president to set the date, and even calls for protests in some sections to push the president to have a date set for the election. Given that you activated your election machinery, are we any closer to a date?
I can't pronounce on the question of a date. What I can simply say is that we are preparing for elections. We are slowly moving into elections mode, and as soon as the date is announced, that will then trigger everything that we ought to be doing as a political party that we've done over the years to contest these elections.
Last time we spoke, you said that the president would obviously engage the party in these discussions. Any sort of discussion?
Well, you know, as I said before, the president is a member of the executive committee of the party. We are continuing discussions not only on that, but on other issues as well.
Yes, you said that some areas that were visited expressed support for the prorogation in light of what should have been an imminent confidence motion, and also that some communities have expressed dissatisfaction with the AFC. First, could you say what communities were visited, what areas expressed support for the prorogation, and what areas expressed dissatisfaction with the AFC? Because you said that this was expressed. So
Well, these would be areas in Region 6 and Region 5, East Berbice and West Berbice. Some of the areas where there are sugar workers, you recall that they had promised a huge percentage increase to sugar workers, which was never fulfilled. And also in West Coast Berbice, there were some inroads into PPP strongholds. Well, those are areas that we have visited, not only once, but on several occasions, to talk with the residents in those areas, as well as the working people, farmers as well. And that is the sense we got from our discussions with them.
okay, so this is on both issues, both the support for prorogation and dissatisfaction with AFC, or was this what you just referred to?
No, these are on both issues.
Okay, so primarily Region 6 and Region 5 expressed confident support for the prorogation. Were there any other areas?
Well, I mean, we've been going all around the country. There has been general expression of those people with whom we met.
Fine, but could you make specific reference to areas?
Well,
other regions and areas.
We've gone in all the regions.
Uh-huh.
Every single region we visited without exception.
So people in all regions have expressed.
People with whom we met in all regions, in all 10 regions, right, have said that they understand why the government, moved to prorogue the parliament. They understood it was a constitutional move, because people are reading both sides or all sides, and these are the conclusions that they draw. People are now more educated and more politically enlightened. So while we may take a message to them in the course of the exchange of views between ourselves and the people with whom we met, they would express these opinions.
Sir, those we had on the party trail in these communities, some of them have been accused of race baiting and all of that. How accurate were those accusations?
Who is that?
Some of your people, they said when you start to talk of a race at these part of house meetings.
Well, anytime such issue would arise, the party has an official policy position. The PPP does not entertain, encourage, or in any way condone remarks of that type. You see? So, given the history of the party and given the policies of the party over the years, should such issues arise, we would, educate and let people know what our policies are. They themselves would draw the necessary conclusions that it is not something that we, tolerated, so to speak, within the ranks of the party.
Minister Rupert Campbell Andrews, could you say if the PPP has settled on a campaign manager, and if yes, who's that person?
Well, I don't think we've ever had a campaign manager. We've never had a campaign manager, so, we haven't, there's no need to settle on something that we never had.
Mr. Prasad wasn't the last campaign manager or something?
I'm not aware of that.
Sir, you spoke about the sugar industry and the residents in those along the sugar belt. The Guyana Agricultural and General Workers Union this past week called for full inquiry into the operations of the Isuco and the sugar industry in Guyana. The party has depended a lot over the years on sugar workers for support and has very close relationship with sugar workers. Is that something that PPP intends to follow up on, that make a similar call for an inquiry of the sugar industry in Guyana over the past few years?
Well, we have been discussing the issue internally in the party, and Mr. Komal Chan, who is a member of the executive committee, also has been, exchanging views among ourselves on the issue as well. But we haven't come out with any definitive position on, whether we would support the GAO position or not. I think it's a much bigger issue than that. So, as a party, we tend to look more at the political side of things rather than the, issues of a commission of inquiry. So we have to actually take any position on that. We haven't taken any position on that.
Sir, one of the things that more or less affected your party in the 2011 election were the allegations of corruption. Is your party addressing that at this time when meeting with the people? Because I got reports that some of the residents you met with actually talked about those things when they met with the party.
Not really. Not really. No. Most of the things that the people raised with us, the things like roads, drainage, garbage. These are the issues that tend to come up almost at every meeting that we visit. Of course, there's some local community issues and so on. From time to time, the issue of crime would come up. It depends on the area, but it's not an issue that is raised at every meeting. But the corruption issue from our supporters, no. Not as far as I'm aware.
Does it be perceived there to be corruption among in the public sector?
But you would recall, before I come to you, sir, you would recall that the party did initiate a television program, on corruption. And it did attract a large amount of viewership. I think there were about 4 or 5 of them, which the political parties were invited to participate along with our ministers and so on. And I thought that got off with a bang. Now, there has been talk about initiating another kind of round of discussions of that type. But remember, the opposition had pulled out from it, on the last occasion. So let's hope that they will, be part of any discussion that we organize on that matter. Yeah.
The perception of corruption within the public sector in Guyana, does people perceive there to be corruption in the public sector?
Well, Amnesty International and Transparency International have constantly been raising this question of perceptions. And I don't think perception is one thing, reality is another. We keep making the point that anyone who has evidence where corruption is or malfeasance is festering, present the evidence somewhere. There's so many institutions that can do that, or even make it public. I'm sure if Kaicho News got hold of some corrupt person somewhere in the government that has taken a bag of money in exchange for something or the other, they would publish it. Or maybe they're holding it for the elections, I don't know.
So you're saying that the lack of adduced evidence is a sign that there is no
But
corruption?
Listen, the man that wrote Napoleon's biography asked the question, Napoleon asked, how many legions do we go? I ask the same question in this respect. If we are to keep, according to the local lingo, goating, so to speak, this issue of corruption, without presenting any kind of evidence, circumstantial or otherwise, prima facie or otherwise, that look, Here we have, just like what Yusuf Kwayana did, I don't know if you recall, where Yusuf Kwayana in the late 70s had presented to, I think, the ombudsman in those days, David Singh and Hamilton Green, about at the Ministry of Works. So I'm saying if anyone has that type of evidence, there is so many institutional arrangements in place where one can go and present it, or else we'll just be stirring a pot on this question of corruption and perception. You know, it sounds so sexy that can be taken by the politicians to, you know, become the flavor of the day.
But the sexiness aside, Mr.
No, you can't leave the sexiness aside. It's very critical.
PPP's perception, leave out Amnesty International or the other external bodies. Does the PPP have a position as it relates to corruption in the public sector?
The party has always maintained, in government and out of government, we do not condone corruption in the public sector, especially when it comes, and that is precisely why, for example, the ministers and other public officials are expected to send in their annual returns to the Integrity Commission, which the opposition never does. The opposition has refused to do that. So,
all right.
We'll come to that later. We'll come to that another day. So, no, we don't condone corruption. I think I've heard many leaders speak on this question already. How could you let's look at the converse. Could you imagine the PPP as a ruling party condoning corruption? How could the PPP as a ruling party says it condones corruption or is encouraging corruption? And if, I'm again insisting that if there was any evidence of the slightest degree where I'm quite positive it would have found its way somewhere for exposure already. I'm quite positive it would have found its way there. But nothing like that has happened as yet. Nothing like that has happened as yet.
Mr. Roy, can you confirm that in recent weeks your ministry has had cause to have an official in the immigration department relieve the people of alleged corrupt practices?
I don't think that was the reason why it was removed.
What was the reason?
It had nothing to do with that.
It had nothing to do with corruption?
It had not, as far as I am aware, it had nothing to do with that. It was more a question of the efficient management of the department and the pace with which people or applicants were having their issues addressed. The sloth, the lethargy with which people who came to that particular area to have their issues addressed, that is what was creating a lot of issues with people who kept calling, kept writing, kept sending emails about the reason why they're not getting their issues addressed. I am concerned with a ministry that is efficiently and effectively run.
There is no element of inducement mentioned?
That has not come to my attention.
No recording of anyone being
that has not come to my attention. If you have something, you should share it with me. I don't know about anything like that. All I know, I've been calling upon the gentleman from time to time. Pardon?
Is the first time you're hearing of matters of inducement and the recording of...
My friend, even before I went there, I've been hearing about that. Even before I went there, I've been hearing about that. You hear about these things all over the place. And that's why we set up. That is why we set up the I Paid a Bribe website, so that people could go to the I Paid a Bribe website and say what they have discovered.
But did you ever ask them about these allegations?
I don't have to ask anybody about these allegations. You know, there's a system in place. There's a structure in the ministry, and the system must function.
Well, we're
You see,
investigating. That
you
was
have to
the
be,
question.
you have to take into consideration that if the minister gets involved, it looks political. It looks political. If the head of the immigration department was of another ethnic, you know, and the minister of Home Affairs had gotten involved, it probably would have been spun in another direction. So you don't know how
One
to.
grandparent is, you said you'd heard of these allegations before. Then the mechanism you have in place, then the mechanism try to go to ascertain whether these allegations
There is a checks and balances system in place which could throw that up at any point in time, where people have access to various areas in the ministry to say what they have done or what somebody has encouraged them to do.
and nothing like that ever surfaced.
In this particular case, as I said, as far as I'm concerned, it is my desire to always run a very efficient ministry. You know, the turnaround time by which people, when they apply for something, must not take more than a month. Sometimes it must take more than 2 weeks, because we don't have a staff shortage there. Right? We don't have a staff shortage.
But did you try to find out why it was taking so long?
Well, I found out why it was taking so long, but I don't want to get too personal into this matter because it might eventually become a personal issue.
But sir, you raised the issue of the IP and Bride website, and the last time I checked that website, they received well over 100,000 complaints or so. Could you say what mechanism is